Welcome back, learners. As we have said before the break, we're going to start with our first concept. Now, that is going to be the structure of an atom. So to start with our structure of an atom, we know that all matter is made up of atoms. Now, if matter is made up of atoms, what is this atom made up of? So, firstly, atoms are made up of three things, three subatomic particles. They are made up of protons, and we know that protons, they are positively charged subatomic particles. And then they're also made up of the following, a subatomic particle, which is a neutron. A neutron doesn't have any charge, and together the proton and the neutron, they are found in a nucleus. They give an atom its mass. So we're saying that the protons are positively charged, whereas the neutrons, they do not have a charge, and they are neither negative or positive. They are together with the protons found in the nucleus of an atom. So as we can see on this picture here, the center of any atom, we have the nucleus. And in a nucleus, you find both the protons and the neutrons. And then lastly, around the nucleus, we have electrons, and those ones are negatively charged. They form an electron cloud. They are always orbiting in a haphazard manner around the nucleus. They do not have any specific movement. They are just rotating or moving around a nucleus. As we can see on this picture here, that we have a nucleus at the center, and we have electrons that are orbiting the nucleus all around in no specific way. And also now, with regards to an atom, we are saying that they are made up of protons, electrons, and neutrons, as we have said. Furthermore, if we have an atom that has equal number of electrons and the protons, then we can safely say that that particular atom, it is neutrally charged. That means it's neither negative or positive. It has equal amount of protons and the electrons. Why? Because the electrons are negative and the protons are positive. So if the positives and the negatives are equal, then the overall charge of that particular atom is going to be 0. Hence, we're saying it's going to be a neutrally charged atom. Now, should it happen that the electrons are greater than the number of protons, so the number of protons being greater than the number of electrons being greater than the number of protons, or we can say that when an atom or when a substance is gaining electrons. Now, when that happens, then obviously the number of electrons are going to be more than the number of protons. If we are starting from a neutrally charged atom, when a substance or when that atom gains electrons, then obviously there's going to be more electrons than the protons. And when that happens, then that atom is going to be negatively charged, or is going to have a negative charge. However, should the electrons be less than the number of protons? So if we are starting from a neutrally charged atom, and now we're saying that that particular atom loses electrons, then what's going to happen? The electrons are going to be less than the number of protons. And when that happens, that atom is going to be positively charged, because protons are going to be more than the electrons, and we know that protons are positively charged. So the overall charge of that atom is going to be a positive charge. Just to recap, if the number of electrons and the number of protons are equal, then the atom is going to have a neutral charge, because the number of electrons and the protons are equal. Now, should that neutrally charged atom gain electrons, that means there's going to be more electrons than the protons. And because of that, the overall charge of that particular atom is going to be negative. Now, in a case whereby now that neutrally charged atom loses electrons, so obviously there's going to be now more protons than the electrons. And when that happens, then the overall charge of the atom is going to be a positive charge. So we always need to know that when an atom has more electrons, it's negative, it's going to be negatively charged. And when it has more protons, it's going to be positively charged. Now, the law of electric charges states that like charges repel and opposite charges attract. So an electron and a proton, they're going to attract each other because they are oppositely charged. An electron is negative and a proton is positive. So they're going to attract each other. That means they're going to be moving towards each other. Now, in a case where we have two negative charges, an electron and an electron, those are going to repel each other. Why? Because the law states that like charges repel. Same applies with a positive and a positive. They are going to repel each other, again because the law states that like charges repel. So we know that protons, they are positively charged, and electrons, they are negatively charged. So the protons and the electrons are going to be attracted towards each other. Why? Because they are oppositely charged. One is negative and the other one is positive. So in a case where, as we have said, we have two positively charged particles or two positively charged subatomic particles, they're going to repel each other because the law states that like charges repel. Same applies with the negatives, like charges repel. Should the two subatomic particles have the same charge, they will repel each other. So, positively charged atoms are attracted to negatively charged atoms, as we know that. Also, lastly now, without this attraction, electrons would not be held within atoms. So because electrons are forming an electron cloud around the nucleus, if there was no attraction between the nucleus, which are the protons, and the electrons, should there be not that attraction force between the two subatomic particles, then the electrons would move away and not be attracted to that particular nucleus and forming that particular atom. So, moving on to our next now atom, when we're saying that how do we then charge the material? We know that when a substance has a negative charge, it means it has more electrons. When a substance has a positive charge, it has more protons. Now, should a substance not have any charge, either negative or positive, it means that substance is neutral. Now, that neutral substance, we can charge it. How do we then charge it? We know that, or we should know that, there are three ways in which an object or the substance that is in question here can be charged. We can charge that substance by friction, charge by conduction, and also charge by induction. Now, in each of these ways of charging that substance, only the electrons are moving. The protons are found in the nucleus. They do not move. Only the electrons will be transferred from one atom to the other atom. So we are saying that the protons are going to stay always in the nucleus. They will never move. Only the electrons are going to be moving from one material to the other material. However, seeing that we have three ways in which a material can be charged, for this purpose or for the purpose of this lesson, we're only going to be focusing on charging the material by friction. So now let's start. What do we mean by friction? So when objects are rubbed together, one object will lose electrons and the other one will gain electrons. So when you take one material with the other material and rub those two substances together or rub those two objects together, one of those materials is going to lose the electrons. And obviously, if one loses electrons, the other one needs to gain those electrons lost by the other material. So if material A loses electrons, then material B should gain the same number of electrons that were lost by material A. So uncharged or neutral objects can become charged if they come into contact with a charged object. So we're taking that neutral substance that has the same number of electrons and protons, and you bring it into contact to now a substance that has either more protons or a substance that has more electrons. So when the neutral substance comes into contact with a charged object, now that charge can either be positively charged or negatively charged. So when that happens, when a charged object is charged with a neutral one, so basically when we are taking the neutral object and then bringing it closer or in contact with a charged object, it will take on the same charges as the one that touches it. So now, should we take now a neutral substance and bring it closer or in contact with a negative or charged negative object, or a negatively charged object, then the neutral object is going to take on the electrons or take on the charge of the element or of the substance that was in contact with it. So that means both of them now are going to be negative. Now we know that when now those two substances are negative, They are going to repel each other. Why? Because the law states that when two substances have the same charge, they are going to repel each other. Should they have opposite charges, they are going to attract each other. Now, for an example, if a negatively charged metal rod touches a neutral ball, then the ball will become negatively charged. The ball was neutral and then a metal rod was negatively charged. Now, when those two substances were brought into contact with each other, the ball took on the charge from the metal rod because the metal rod was negative, and now the ball will take that charge and also be negative. Now that the ball and the metal rod have the same charge, they are going to repel each other. We always need to remember that like charges repel and unlike charges, they attract. So now, as we've said, since they have now the same charge, they are going to repel each other. Like charges repel as the law states, and unlike charges are going to attract each other. So learners, before we go on to our next concept, we're just going to quickly go for a short break, and I will see you just after this.